Hey, this is Crane, and this is another rep review. This time it's Armada versus Yenta. It's a PvZ on Ascension. And here we have a gate expand versus a hatch first. We opt for the Nexus off of one Zealot, which I think is fine. It's a little bit risky if it's a close position, but I think it's a fine choice. My only note is if you do this, I think it's appropriate to get the core at the natural instead of the forge. Because we should be safe. The link speed is going to be quite delayed, so we should be safe to get our core here. And in fact, you actually hold this without a cannon, so obviously this could have been a core. The follow-up here, I'm not going to make any big comments on because I don't gatefe very much, so I can't speak to many of the details here. The only thing I'd note is your second gate felt quite early. So right here, you add your second gate, and I think this causes you to have a supply block at 50 out of 50. And you just can't quite afford everything. So I think this gateway is quite early. With Forge Fast Expand, you typically add this at 50 after the pylon for 50 out of 50 is already put down. So I think this is early, and it interrupts your build a little bit. Here, you know, we kill the Overlord with the Corsair rather than looking for a Hydra bust. So we have the safety cannon, which is good, but I think just sending the Sarah to scout would have been a little bit better. Something small to note, in vertical positions, you can typically save your forge by putting two cannons hugging the top or bottom of your forge, and that might be able to save your +1. Sometimes they'll jump forward and kill the cannons or something, but it at least gives you a chance to keep this +1, and that's obviously quite important. So this is a not all-in 3-hatch Hydra. He gets a lair and goes into drones after this rather than trying to kill you. So when that happens, you need to be thinking about your follow-up like now. And we're going to see that you float quite a lot of resources here, and that should have been in whatever you're going to follow up. So right now you should be adding gateways because you've chosen, in this game you chose to do a speed lot follow up. So you should be adding gateways right now, and optionally you could even be pulling out 3 probes from gas to do an even better or an even faster zealot push. But instead the gateways go down quite a lot later here, and that pushes our timing like a minute late at least. So really would like to see these gateways go down a lot faster because we're floating a ton of minerals here. So I think you would have like been hitting a little bit after 8, like maybe around now you'd be hitting with 10-ish zealots, and obviously you could have done a pretty significant amount of damage here or here, especially here. So that's important to note. The alternative is to go for Templar and a Robo immediately and go for a DT High Templar drop. But this is a perfectly fine option if you time it correctly. The next thing to note is your mid-game macro follow-up. So when you do a Zealot follow-up from a Hydra bust and you keep the probes in your gas, you're going to float quite a lot of gas, so why not use it? You only went for 3 High Templar here. I really consider 4 High Templar to be the bare minimum you want in mid-game PvZ. So in this game, there's no reason you couldn't go for 4 or 5 High Templar for our mid-game push. I think that was a mistake and made your mid-game a lot weaker. The other thing to note is probe count. 35 is like a hard minimum for mid-game PvZ. And here we're at 40, which basically means that we can support 8 gateways and pylons, and that's about it. So when you cut on 40, you're not all in, but you have to do damage in order to stay in the game. So in this game, instead of pushing right when we have our observer, which would have been the correct option, we take a third, and I think that's the biggest flaw by far in this game. So right when this observer finishes, we'll see that you're ahead by like 40 supply right now, and Zerg has like nothing, right? Like they have a couple control groups of Hydras here and like a control group of units at home. You would have just straight up killed them if you pushed right now. But taking this third gave them a lot of time that they really should not have had. So I think especially if you're going to cut at 40 probes, you should be shipping right with the first observer. But we give them some time here, and I like I said, I think that's the biggest error. But even with the late push, I think it was manageable. You still weren't like completely out of the game, but we needed to do a lot of damage with our push, and instead we actually completely lost our army. Um, and I think that's partially because our High Templar count is only 3, so we should have had 4 or 5. But I don't think we controlled it quite right either. So right here we have our army positioned here to push down into the main Zerg army, but PvZ Zerg is always going to be setting up a flank. So the best option here is to actually push into the flank horizontally and stop like at the ridge or just after the ridge, so that maybe we can kill a few of these Hydras or at least push them off in this direction. And it also will naturally make a nice line for our army right here so that we have a big arc for pushing downward. So if this flank comes back in, we can just back up a little bit with the units on this side, and we can have a nice arc in this direction and be at least even in the arc rather than what we're going to see where we get totally surrounded here. So the fact that you're vertical here, I think, is an error. I think you want to be horizontal pushing down here. That being said, I think it was still salvageable pushing down this way, but you just needed to push down a little bit, and then right when you see this flank, you should have backed up and then re-engaged the flank. So obviously this will mean that you can eat this small number of units with your entire army, but it also means that these units in the bottom are going to clump up as they attack move vertically, so your storms are going to be much better. And it also means that all of these units that Zerg is attack moving in without hotkeys are just going to run into your army one control group at a time, and we can trade very efficiently that way. So I think all those things together, I mean, we just didn't quite control our army well here. And so we end up losing our entire mid-game army. And this always feels like we are in an unwinnable position when we lose this mid-game army. So obviously try not to lose that army, but if you do, I think you need to immediately frame your game from a typical PvZ to a split map PvZ right away. So I think every step, every decision you make from here should be, how do I split the map, not how do I punish the Zerg. So you need to take this fourth, secure it, get a bunch of cannons and Templar and Reavers here, and then start pushing this way and taking all of these bases to try to split the map favorably in the ultra late game. You end up going for a push in this direction, and I think that's just incorrect. We know we're behind in army based on the fact that we lost that mid-game army, and so I don't think we should be pushing at all. But if we were, it should probably be in this direction because we really need to protect this new base, and all of Zerg's fresh bases are in this direction anyway. So this attack doesn't really accomplish anything. So overall, I think there's a handful of mistakes, but the biggest one by far is the lack of push in the mid game and taking this third so early. I think we should have delayed that for a push.